Some teachers strive to become principals or any other form of leadership in a school, whether it is being the deputy principal or even just the HOD or a grade tutor or a grade head. But leadership is something that we don't really get taught. And we need some modeling, or we need some examples of what leadership in education looks like. In today's episode, I interviewed Daniel Bauer. Daniel is the chief ruckus maker at Better Leaders, Better Schools. That is his organization, his company. And I first got to know him about 2 years ago when I started listening to his podcast called Better Leaders, Better Schools, where Daniel assists out-of-the-box thinkers to become school leaders and basically coaches and assists other school leaders in being the best possible principals or administrators that they can possibly be. So in today's episode, it was such a privilege to have a chat to Daniel, because I'm a big fan of the content that he produces, but the message that he proclaims also. So it was amazing sitting down with him and having him on the Super Teachers Unite show. I'm looking forward to everybody hearing this, because I think it was very, very cool what he had to say and very inspiring for me. So sit back, relax, have a listen or watch this episode and tell me what you think of it or what the lesson was you took out of it on the social media platform of your choice. Hi, my name is Francois Nordier and I am a super teacher, and this is Super Teachers Unite, the show that's all about motivating, inspiring and supporting teachers. And with me today, I've got the chief ruckus maker himself, Daniel Bauer. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Whoa, it's a pleasure to be here, Francois. So thank you so much for having me. This is great.
The first time I heard your content was probably a year ago on your podcast called Better Leaders, Better Schools. Absolutely fell in love with your content, and I'm privileged. I'm so privileged to have you on my show, and I'm so excited to expose you to my audience and having them also go over and listen to your podcast.
Yeah, super teachers, what's going on? Hello, good to see you all.
Great stuff. Daniel is an international traveler and he assists school leaders all over the world. And he's got a mission of assisting out-of-the-box thinkers and school leaders with building up their leadership potential. And he does that through his podcast. He's got a book. He's got his Mastermind and website. Please go and check it out. For those of you joining us live on the Crowdcast platform, you'll see I'll put a link down in the call to action. Go check out Daniel's website. It's betterleadersbetterschools.com. Please go over and check him out. Daniel, before I thank my sponsors, I first want to ask you something. Your handle on Twitter is Alien Earbud. It's at Alien Earbud. You can check him out on Twitter. But I need to know before I jump into the episode, where does that come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I put it in the chat too. So I was a English teacher, reading and writing. 6th grade, I did young kids, and then also high school students, so worked with older kids as well. But long story short, I love word games, right? And playing with language. And so Alien Earbud is just an anagram for Daniel Bauer. So sometimes on the chalkboard, when we had chalkboards, or then those became whiteboards, and then we had projectors, I'd put a phrase, across the board, and I'd say make as many words as you can using those letters, right? And then I'd have some type of gift or treat for the students that came up with over 50, over 100. We'd have different goals. So you take Daniel Bauer, you mix around the letters, and you get one option's Alien Earbud. I just like that visual. Some came down from space, right? Got their AirPods in, earbuds or whatever. They're tuned into the podcast. And that was before I had Better Leaders, Better Schools. That was when I was just me. But it works. I do work with innovative out-of-the-box ruckus makers. And so I just always kept it. That's who I am. So that's the story.
That's amazing. Go check out Daniel at Alien Earbud on Twitter. But before we jump into today's episode, just a major thanks to World Tracker, who's bringing you this episode, wiltracker.com. It is a platform that brings student teachers, mentor teachers, and university lecturers together on an online platform, because we know the journey towards becoming a super teacher starts when you're at university level and studying towards becoming a teacher. This platform brings all of the ecosystem within education together so that you can get your school practice in, even during coronavirus and lockdown time. You can get in your mentorship from mentor teachers online, and you can build a relationship with them and then move on over into the classroom. Go check out wiltracker.com, WIL tracker.com. Now, there's also the WhatsApp service. Everybody who's invited to the live online recordings of these interviews, they are part of the WhatsApp community. This is not a WhatsApp group, by the way, because nobody has got time for WhatsApp groups anymore. You don't want to get your details shared with anybody else, and you are probably tired of all of the memes that people are sending out. But please come and join us over on the WhatsApp service, and you'll get early access to events. You'll get special invites to interviews like these, and you can ask questions to our great guests. And of course, participate in the Designer Lesson Challenge at the end of every episode. So if you'd like to be part of our WhatsApp service, just send your name through to the following number. I'm going to repeat it as well. But you can send it through to +27 63 681 6410. I'll repeat that, +27 63 681 6410. And you can also be part of the action. Great stuff. With all of that housekeeping out of the way, first of all, can I ask everybody who is attending the live recording, jump down into the polls. You'll see at the bottom there are polls. I'd like you to quickly vote on the subject that you want Daniel and myself to include in our Designer Lesson Challenge. Go and click on a subject of your choice, as well as the phase of school you'd like us to design the lesson for. So please go and vote in the polls at the bottom there. At the end of today's episode, Daniel and I, as well as our live studio audience, we are going to come up with a brand new, exciting lesson. That's it. Let's jump into today's episode. Daniel, I am very excited to hear about everything that you do. And I think I want to start off with your mastermind. Please tell us, because I think that's quite a foreign concept for most South Africans. We don't have many masterminds. What is a mastermind, and what exactly do you guys do there?
Yeah, thank you, Francois. This chat's fun too, so I'm checking that out. So that's great stuff. Mastermind, they've been around forever. Napoleon Hill wrote about it in Think and Grow Rich, and that book is old. It's older than me. So, and the interesting thing is that these high level, high impact people would come together. And, I believe South Africa is a pretty communal society, and we're better together. All of us are better than any of us. And that's what the mastermind's all about. So if we rewind back to 2015, I'm at a conference called the Global Leadership Summit, and the facilitator says something that changes everything for me, which is everybody wins when a leader gets better. And I'm thinking, whoa, there's responsibility there. There's weight to that quote. How am I leveling up as a leader? And if my community, if their experience is contingent on how I'm developing myself, I have a responsibility as a leader to get better. And the sobering reality is, when I reflected on my calendar, yeah, I was at that conference, but I didn't have another one planned for the entire year. And I'm a big reader. I always read, so that's a great thing. But I didn't have a coach at the time. I wasn't necessarily doing a number of courses to grow my skill set. And so that changed everything. And so my lived experience as an assistant principal, the district didn't have leadership development opportunities for us. Like it was a blind spot. They completely looked over us. And I had a choice, right? There's the fork in the road. Do I throw myself a pity party and win an award for the leader who has it the worst because nobody's developing him? Or do I take the ownership into my own hands? And so I did what you did. I started a show, and I figured if I talked to people that were further along than where I was, if I learned from their successes, if I learned from the failures, and most importantly, not just writing down what they did, but took action on just one idea, that over time would help me grow. And that turned out to be true. So I did that with the podcast, and you asked about masterminds. I joined a mastermind myself. And within 6 months, Francois, the personal and professional growth that I experienced was so profound. Light bulb moment. I had an epiphany. And I looked at our industry and I said, who is connecting isolated school leaders? It's a very tough job. And I believe, and I know now that leading in isolation is a choice. You don't have to do it that way. And so I just said, I'm gonna do masterminds in education, specifically for school leaders. It's an invitation. Hey, do you want to join? And people started joining. There were 7 founding members. I did this as a passion project, as a side hustle for 2 years as I was still leading in the school. That grew to 20 something. And then at that point, decided to go all in to pursue this dream fully, and grew the community from 20 something to 60. So in addition to having the podcast, the mastermind, and then some leaders I work with one-on-one, that's what I do these days.
That's absolutely amazing. And I love the convergent thinking that's happening, because I feel similar to you, not necessarily only in the leadership space, but teachers in general, especially if you're a good, competent teacher with what I term a super teacher. If you're really competent in what you're doing, it's quick to get isolated in a school, because there are very many mediocre teachers. There are very many bad teachers. And if you're really passionate in being a teacher, you can get isolated very quickly. And I feel as strong as you do that we need to connect people from all over the world that's got similar ways of thinking and our passions aligned, to learn from each other. And if I understand it correctly, this concept of a mastermind is basically a platform or a space for these leaders that do think the same, or at least at the same, or want to learn from each other, that it's a space that you provide for them to get together.
Yeah, you got it right. I described a bit of the value and the emotions that you might feel joining and being connected to such a driven network. But yeah, the logistics of it, it's a weekly meeting, right? So we gather for an hour every week over Zoom, which everybody knows Zoom. We've been doing Zoom for so long. Now I feel like the guy that used to listen to the band, and everybody now knows about the band. Like,
exactly, you were the hipster users of Zoom, the OGs of Zoom users.
Totally. And so now everybody knows. But we meet there, and then we have a protocol, that we follow. From a high level, it's celebrating wins. It's discussing great books that are going to challenge us. The July book we're about to start is How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. And we actually read books only outside of education. I could talk about that later if you like. But so book study, wins of the week, celebrations, one big thing. So what do you want to accomplish? If you're a super teacher, what do you want to try? What do you want to experiment, in your classroom? And then the real great value, besides being connected to this awesome network, is the hot seat. And that's just where you say, Francois, here's my number one challenge. This is a project I'm trying to get off the ground. And here's the thing. Joel Weldon's this motivational speaker. He says, it's really hard to read the label when you're inside the can, right? So if you're inside here, right, it's hard to read what's going on out here. And that's a great quote about perspective. And that's what the mastermind gives. So when you put this problem in front of 15 other high performers, super teachers, so to speak, and they get to tell you and show you what you don't see, there's so much value in that, right? And you learn from their experiences and their successes and failures. And people, I've seen them go from instructional coach to AP to principal to superintendent. So they're solving all their challenges, but they're also leveling up within their career. And that's just very, very satisfying for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's valuable. And this concept of accretion that you just mentioned is that thing that if I change one small thing every day or once a week, or I just improve myself a little bit over time, that becomes an immense improvement. And if you're in a school, whether you're in a classroom on your own or you're a school leader, that incremental change and incremental improvement that you're busy with is going to spill on over into your school and into the school community.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big idea that's actually quite small though, right? Like, do what's the next smallest step? I love asking that question as a coach, working with people, because you have these grand visions, these big ideas. That in itself may feel quite overwhelming. But if you just take the next step. So I'm working on my second book, right? The publisher I'm working with wants 30,000 to 40,000 words. I know myself, so that doesn't feel overwhelming. But if the resistance, if the imposter syndrome, if I listen to that voice in my head, like, nobody cares what you're writing about, dude. Like you're writing this, nobody's going to buy it, and they're not even going to like it when they read it. If I listen to that voice, I would be paralyzed. Or if I looked at 40,000 words, like, oh my God, how do I ever get that? Well, I'm not going to try to write that in one day or even a week. And I don't know if you're familiar with Jim Collins' work, but he has this idea of the 20-mile march. And essentially, it's just to be consistent, right? And he tells a story there of two expeditions that I think were going to North Pole or something like that. And essentially, one group hit all the great tech, and they had way too many supplies than they needed and all this kind of stuff. And it didn't matter. They would go they would just push it really, really hard as much as they could every single day. Or if the weather was terrible, they'd feel bad for themselves and they would just huddle in their tents. Meanwhile, there's this other expedition who just did 20 miles per day. And they were very precise in their planning and the map and the path that they would take, right? And they took just enough that they needed, and they didn't rely on this great technology and whatever. They used dogs and sleds, like very rudimentary stuff, right? But they did just 20 miles a day. Weather was great, they did 20 miles, they stopped. Weather was bad, they pushed through. They did 20 miles and then they got to relax and stop. And the crazy thing that happened with the one expedition, with all the tech, all the food, all the stuff, right? They died. They died. They literally paid the ultimate price. They got lost. They got wrapped up into all their stuff, trying to think that would save them. It didn't. But the group that had just a sled, a dog, and everything that they needed, just the minimum, and bought into the vision of just 20 miles per day, they made it there and back and survived with their life and accomplished their goal. So bringing it back to the book and the next smallest step, 40,000 words. For me, I commit to writing 1 hour per day. What I've learned about myself, that gets to be about 1,000 words. But even if I did just 200, I'm going to write for 1 hour a day, no matter how I feel. And what I've learned is that my first book was done in just less than 3 months, actually. 47,000 words I wrote. And this book, I've been working for a number of days. I'm already at 14,000 words, and I think I've been working on it, let's say 12 days. And I actually post, I put my Instagram handle in there. I do that in my story, and you can see like my progress. So I put my money where my mouth is. But that's all I have to do. And if I'm feeling great, I stop, right? I could keep going, but there's other things I need to accomplish. And if I feel terrible, I give my permission to say, hey, I showed up for that hour. I did my 20-mile march, and now on to the other things I have to work on.
Yeah, and I think that it's got a lot to do with motivation as well. A lot of times I don't feel like doing something, but I tell myself, let's try 5 minutes. Because after you've done something for 5 minutes, you're already in it, and you'll feel like I can go a little bit longer. Even if it's just 20 minutes, you keep on going. And after the 20 minutes, you can reassess the whole time. But I really give myself the permission that if after 5 minutes, my heart is still not into it and I'm not working on it as good as I should, I stop, and I'd rather reschedule and do that a little bit later on in the day. So I think that's extremely valuable, and it helps us in schools as a school leader, because a lot of times we've got these goals we want to achieve, and we think we need the best tech, and all of our kids need to have all of these devices and need to move into the 21st century. But I love this analogy and story you just told, that, you know what, we can make do with what we have, but if we're a unit and if we are planned and we really come together, then with every small step we can actually reach the goals that we set ourselves. So I think that's very valuable. Now, I know you do get you're involved with many school leaders from all over the globe. What has been your experience with school leaders during lockdown and how they're dealing with coronavirus? What's the general feeling?
I think it's similar to probably what a lot of communities are feeling, and it doesn't, necessarily matter the industry or, if you take it personal or professional. it's difficult to deal with ambiguity, you know,
Mhm.
and there's so much out of our control with this. And so that could be scary, right? And frightening. It could increase anxiety and your nervousness, and you might be driven to some bad choices as a result too. So I think it's like just that high level of stress, right?
Mhm.
And so something that we talk about within the mastermind. I mean, I got this email from one of the leaders I served today, Joe, and he's probably not watching, but I'm gonna wish him a happy anniversary because it's his wedding anniversary today. But anyways, Joe was talking about, I've been going back a lot to the books the Stoics wrote, Stoic philosophers, and they were really big on what's in your control,
Mhm.
and really their philosophy can be summarized to three key points, which is to control your perceptions, direct your actions properly, and then the last part, willingly accept what is in and outside of your control. So I talk about this circle, and your circle of competence, and what are the things that, yeah, you do have control over, what are the things you just got to let go. And so what do you control? You control your attitude. I controlled if I was prepared for our talk today. I control my presence. So am I going to be kind, or am I going to be arrogant and egotistical, or a jerk? Like, who do I want to be? Who am I at my best self? Um, in terms of preparation, you can have some sort of plan, but you got to hold it loosely because things change every single week, right? So
Mhm.
you got to be flexible in your approach. But that's what I see working with leaders all over the world, is that um, a lot of people are saying, we want to plan, it's everywhere. So like the local level, your state or provincial level, like the country level. But if you're just going to wait around for people to tell you what to do, you're going to be waiting for a long time. And then you're going to realize you're going to be way too stressed, because by the time you get the quote unquote plan, um, first of all, it's going to be too late. School's starting like the next week, and the plan's going to say this, here's our guidelines, but you can do what you want, right? It's going to say
Mhm.
a lot of those plans are going to have this little hook that says, but locally you can do what you want. So I think best folks are creating multiple plans right now. School as you've known it, some sort of hybrid model, or fully virtual.
Yeah, I think one of the major challenges for us is how unpredictable the future really is, and
Yeah.
as much as you want to plan, it's so difficult, because even if you have a plan in place, the situation changes almost daily, and now you need to
Yeah.
audible and you need to move with the times. And I like what you said about the Stoics, and I like this intersection between the Stoics and the Buddhists about control.
Yeah.
And it's extremely important to realize what it is that is in your control. And as you mentioned, and what I believe is, you're only in control of three things in total. And it's what you think, it's what you say, and what you do.
Yeah.
Outside of
That's
those
it.
three things, that's it. You've got zero control about the rest. And that's why when I work with teachers, we have this thing about classroom management, and classroom management and control is two different things, where teachers want to be in control of the classroom, when at the end of the day, it's so out of your control what happens in your class. You can only control what you think, what you say, and what you do.
Yeah, and you can control your effort in building great relationships and that kind of stuff. So let me tell you, can I tell you a story about, I learned something with classroom management. Before that, I used to send kids out hallway or send them to the principal's office. We'd have discipline referrals and that kind of stuff. And when I learned this trick, I wrote up 0 kids. Never had a
Mhm.
problem again.
Give us the trick.
Well, the trick is that the problem was me. So I learned it was the energy and my attitude and my responses to kids' behaviors that changed everything.
Mhm.
And so I learned some phrases like you mentioned Buddhists, and I kind of think of it like as Star Wars Jedis, like they were able to say, like, you will believe this, and
These are
when
not the
kids,
droids you are looking for.
not at all, right? These are not the droids. And so kids would still be kids, and they're going to do stupid stuff from time to time, or things that are aggravating or whatever. And I started in my toolbox. It was a parenting podcast I heard, but the dad was talking about there's nothing better than a kid to see an adult just have an emotional meltdown and to get on this roller coaster and totally lose control. And if you could go back in your mind as a kid and see an adult like just losing it, it's pretty funny. Like that is like really hilarious, because in some ways that's an adult acting like a kid, and the kid goes, they know like you shouldn't be doing that. You're an adult, right? So anyways, that's the response they're looking for, and you need to know that. Mm-hmm. So the phrases that I learned was like, that could be, probably, maybe. And it was all these other, it was these responses that was like in the middle of the road, you know? It wasn't too much like, yeah, I totally agree or I totally disagree. And kids would say stuff like, Mr. Bauer, you suck. You know, they'd say some hard things, but they're just trying to get a rise out of me. Mm-hmm. And I was a great teacher. I won tons of awards. I had great relationships with my kids, but that doesn't mean they didn't push me, you know? And so they'd say, you suck, or I'm not going to do your homework. You know, this class is terrible. It's boring. And I would say, you know what? Probably you're right. Maybe that could be, you know, and they'd be like, what? Maybe, probably. It literally short circuited their brain. And because I wouldn't escalate or get in a fight with them, it completely changed everything. So that was one thing. Then the other part I learned is that I used to solve way too many of my students' problems. Mm-hmm. And that was so stressful. So I taught from 6th grade, that's 11th or 12th grade in the US, up into high school. And those 6th graders, you know, they have lockers with combination locks in the hallways in the typical American school. And at the end of the year, they would tell me that they didn't know how to open their locker. They've been opening it their entire year. And I would get so mad and frustrated, like, Francois, what do you mean? Like, you don't know how to open your locker? And like, and I'd go out there with you and like, tell me the combination. And I'd do it for you. And I'd open up the locker, like, come on, right? Get to class. And then I realized, like, why am I doing that? First, I'm acting like a jerk. And then second, he knows how to open his locker. Let me just get him some space. So you would come to class, you would say, Mr. Bauer, I don't know how to open my locker. And instead of me going and solving that problem for you, I go, oh, Francois, you don't know how to open your locker. Oh, man, what are you going to do? And I put it back in the students' ownership, right, in their hands. And what happened, it wasn't Francois. You knew how to open your locker, so great job. You're a great kid. It was this student, Tijuana, I'll never forget. And she was a handful, you know. She really caused trouble in the class at times. And I'm just thinking, oh, man. And so I said, Tijuana, what are you going to do? I'll never forget it. She said, well, do you mind if I go back and try a few more times? I just need more time. I think I was rushed. And if I come back, and this is why she wanted help. If I come back, will you maybe just let me in class, like not give me a tardy, right? Because she was worried about the consequence. I said, no problem. So before, when Tijuana was late, and she was always late, I promise you this, when she came in, she'd make a big show. Hey, look at me. I'm in class, you know, and like would act a fool, and all the kids would crack up laughing, and that would get us off task. Would you know, Francois, that she came back to class, said, like, gave me a wink, like a thumbs up, and went just straight to her seat. No dance, no show. And it's because with empathy, because you got to care. You got to say, oh my gosh, what's happening? What are you going to do about it? She just had to figure it out on her own. And I started doing that in every situation. And it was amazing what kids revealed that they could do that I didn't let them do because I was doing it all for them.
But that comes back to school leadership for me in a great way, because it comes down to micromanagement. If you're going to keep on doing things for other people, you're just going to frustrate them because that's not how they want to do it. You've got the specific bias on how you want a task to be completed. Instead of embracing somebody's diversity on how they want to do the task, stepping back. And the one golden rule is never do something for somebody who is capable of doing something for themselves. Yeah. You're taking away all their power and all their agency when you try and do things for them. take a step back and allow them the space and take away the pressure, and you'd be surprised with the reaction that you get from them.
Yeah, that's good. And and just think about, like, you're frustrating them with the micromanagement. I didn't feel good doing it either, right?
Yeah.
And so it's funny when I have supervisors micromanage me, I know that I'm causing them stress, but if they would just chill, right, and trust, that's really what it's about, is trust. Or if you don't, like, build that person's capacity, so that's all good stuff. And in the mastermind, the members facilitate the meetings. It's not me. It's not the Danny show. And that was great. And I had a false, I believed a myth in that, since people, they invest, they pay to be a part of this community. I thought that they wanted to hear from me every single week, that I had to lead, like, hey, you need to be working since we're paying you. And what I found, because I got sick one week, right? Like, you get sick, that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to miss. And I'm thinking, well, who's going to run it? Like, oh no. Well, I asked Francois to run it, and it went perfectly. It went fine. And what I realized, then I questioned my assumption. Does it have to be me all the time? And what am I limiting when it is just me? And what's possible if I hand over the leadership to the community? And basically, the community got even better, because now just my perspective, like you were saying, and my worldview and experiences, everybody brought their characteristics and their talents to lead in the group, and it got exponentially better. And the other thing I didn't expect too is that for a lot of folks, they're actually quite nervous to lead leaders, right? They've led classrooms, they've gotten over that. They've led professional development within their district, but they're super teachers, right? They're ruckus makers. So they're already performing at a higher level than everybody around them. Now you put them in a place where everybody's an A player. How do I lead that group? And so that helped stretch their ability even more, which was amazing. And that was just a great thing for me to figure out. So it was awesome to have them lead.
No, that's great. And I think we need a lot more of these agency-driven leaders in our schools, instead of these authoritarian, like almost policy enforcers, because that's not what we need a principal for, or a deputy principal for, or an HOD. That's not the role. I mean, the role, I believe, of a school principal is to create an environment or an atmosphere or a culture in a school that is suitable, conducive for education. And the teachers you have use their strengths. And this is where I use the analogy of super teachers, like forming the Avengers. Like every single super teacher has got their own superpower to bring to the party to solve a situation. You just have to give them the platform to go out and shine. But Daniel, I wanted to ask you, a lot of the teachers listening to this show are quite like new to education, or aspiring to become school leaders. What would you say should be the trajectory, or the type of things you have to implement in your early days, or maybe you're a bit further along in your career, but you've got these aspirations of becoming a school leader? What would be like your advice to them?
Yeah, so just to reflect back, they're super teachers, and one day want to become a school leader. So what advice do I have for them?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously you're leading. I want you to understand that you're already leading, right? And sometimes people think leadership's a title, and on some level it is, right? You get the principal title or whatever, and people are going to change the way they act around you just because of that title, and your salary goes up, right? But you're already leading within a classroom. And one thing that I hate hearing, that's a pet peeve of mine, it just drives me nuts when I hear people say, I'm just a teacher, right? Oh man,
so much more. There's so much more.
Right. And if you want people to respect what you do and the value that you provide professionally and the impact that you have in your community and on a global scale by pouring into these kids, you got to get out of a just a teacher mindset. And so to me, that's what I would call an upper limit challenge, right? And so you got to break through out of that. Labels are very important, how you think about yourself. And so maybe too, developing some kind of affirmation, or some sort of mantra that you repeat all the time. Read a great book in the Mastermind called The Big Leap by an author named Gay Hendricks. And he has the ultimate success mantra is what he says. And I have a longer affirmation, but I'll just share this part because I took it from him and I use it. And I say it every day. And it's that I expand in abundance, success, and love every day. And I inspire those around me to do the same, right? So that's a reminder to myself to be expanding, constantly expanding in terms of abundance of what I experience, success, right? Because of the value I provide through my coaching, and love because I want to be a relational and compassionate human being. So have something like that you repeat. So know that you're already leading within the classroom. And then some things that you could be doing within your control would be looking for problems to solve within your community, right? So I don't know what that might be, but if you see that maybe the school is struggling connecting with a certain kind of kid, well, figure out how you're going to connect. Maybe they're from a neighborhood. And why is that neighborhood feeling disconnected from the school? Well, maybe they don't feel seen or heard or acknowledged in a way that they feel really valued, and so start just getting very curious. Curiosity is a top skill that every high impact leader has, right? Not assuming that you have all the answers, even if you might have the answers, but being curious about why things are happening and questioning assumptions at all times. So cultivating that curiosity, solving problems that you see. If the quote unquote leaders within your school are asking for educators to step up and say they need help with different initiatives, are you first to raise your hand? So make sure you're getting involved in all that kind of stuff. And then there's so much value in terms of building your network, right? So just growing outside of your little school bubble to just larger and more expansive areas, connecting with other educators and putting your hand up to raise, and lead different initiatives on a bigger scale too. You never know where those doors will open. So social media, you could be putting stuff out if you start teaching people, different things that you're great at and building up a bit of a platform and that kind of thing. The resume is not dead, but I think a new way of thinking about the resume is doing what we do, doing the work in public, right? So showing what you're all about through YouTube channel, through your Instagram profile, through Twitter, through your website, through your blog, because like the resume says one thing, but if I go to your blog and you've been writing every day for a year, and you're talking about how you interact with kids or how you lead within a classroom or your philosophy of education, I know a lot more about you. And when it's compared to you and this person who just has a resume, right, I'm going to go with you. It's assuming that I like what you're putting out there.
Yeah.
But that's good. You got to pick an edge, pick what you stand for, which will attract the right kind of people and deter the wrong ones. And that's a good thing. You're not for everybody. That's important as a leader. I'll stop here. But choices you make, the edges and where you choose to stand is not going to be for everyone. Everybody doesn't listen to my podcast. Everybody doesn't join my mastermind. That's all right. It's not for everyone. It's for a specific kind of person who I'm trying to serve. And for those folks, it works wonderfully.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. That's a lot of value, and I wanna link up to something you say there about the social media content that you create. Actually, you don't need to create; you can just document what you're busy doing. And that's a lot of the coaching that I do with the teachers that are part of my community. Is like, how can you actually utilize the social media platforms to showcase what you are doing? Because the amazing thing that's currently happening, and I agree with you, that the resume is dead. It's like one piece of paper. But if you can take your resume and add links to your social media platforms, and you actually tell the principal out there, listen, here's the work that I've been doing. I've got this portfolio of evidence. It's so much easier to get employed. But what I'm seeing happening is so many school principals, and I don't like adding age to this, but this is what I'm seeing. You're more like middle-aged type of principal and school leader is starting to go to social media to go and find the dynamic teachers that they want to be part of their school community.
Yeah. It's a great way to, just find who's putting out good stuff into the universe and find great talent. So, yeah.
Yeah. So we're running out of time. I mean, it's amazing chatting to you, and there's a lot of value in it for myself, and of course for the audience. But I want to
Cool.
jump into your a little bit about you, and I'm going to ask a few questions about that. But before we do that, if you're still here with us on the live interview on the Crowdcast platform, please go and vote in the polls at the bottom for the subject that you want the two of us to include in our designer lesson challenge, as well as the school phase you'd like us to make that applicable to. So please go and vote in the polls. If you've got a question you want to ask to Daniel, there is a ask a question tab at the bottom there. Just pop it in there and I'll make sure that I ask that question to Daniel. But Daniel, what would you say is your superpower?
I gather people. So that's one of them. I have a unique ability to bring people together from diverse backgrounds, and that's a wonderful quality, because then everybody in the room, just gets better. The other one is my ability to tap into my imagination. And did you know that Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge? Whoa, what? Like the smartest dude, or arguably the smartest dude, right, in the world, said that your imagination is more important than knowledge. And so I try to do a lot of playful things and things that tap into my creativity and imagination, because that helps me turn my dreams into reality, and think about anything that you love. It was a dream first, right? Somebody had to dream it up, and then they made it a reality. So imagination and gathering people.
I like that what you said about Einstein. You know that the way in which he came up with the theory of relativity was actually sitting and having a thought experiment, imagining what it would be like riding on a ray of light. And that imagination and creativity led him to the knowledge of the theory of relativity. So we shouldn't discard creativity, and that is absolutely a superpower. But it's interesting for me that you say that your superpower is bringing people together, because I also believe that's my superpower. And I had an interview with Tim Cavey from the Teachers on Fire podcast. And he said exactly the same thing. So it's interesting that the three of us who've got our own podcast and web series, we've got this notion and superpower of bringing people together and utilizing our platforms to do that. So that's amazing.
Well, if it's easy, everybody be doing it, right? So maybe that's true, that it is a superpower, and people resonate with the message. There's a bunch of folks here engaged in the chat and watching the live stream. But that's the thing, like you put out the signal. People don't have to come. Nobody has to be here right now, but folks are, and they're growing, and so that is a superpower.
Yeah. Daniel, tell us a story of a teacher in your life that was a super teacher that really made an impact on your life.
So many. I'll pick Professor Arlette Willis. That was college, university, and when I was training to be a teacher. And she really opened my eyes to privilege, which was something that I didn't really understand that I had as a young white male. And we did this one equity exercise where we all stood in a line, and she just read some different statements, and based on the statement, you moved forward or not, or you stood still. We had our eyes closed as we did it. And by the time we were done, it was short. It was only like 10, maybe at max 20 statements. When I opened my eyes and I looked around, some people were in front of me for sure. A lot of people were in back, and my peers that were in back were my black and brown friends, and that's when privilege made sense in my mind. And so I'm so grateful that she did that activity for me. And she was great in terms of teaching us just like critical thinking skills, and gave us confidence as an educator. So she was a super teacher too, because when I accepted my first position teaching, I was on top of hiking Stone Mountain, which is outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And I called her from the top and I said, Professor Willis, I got my first job. And, we celebrated on the phone together. And through that first year teaching too, I would call her maybe not every week, but once a month, and just, keep her updated. And through the first 3 or 4 years, she said, hey, come back to university. It's time for you to get your master's. I'll pay for it, right? And you just need to come back. So the moral of that story, the importance of developing relationships, because she was able to get me a position in the university, which paid for my tuition. And I mean, that's, college in America is way too expensive. So
Yeah.
that
Well,
was a good thing.
everywhere it's much more expensive than it is in South Africa. But even just if you compare like for like in South Africa, university entrance is also very, very expensive. But thank you for sharing that story, and I think that emphasis on relationship and that's very important. That's what's going to make you be a memorable super teacher, is when you start building those personal connections and those relationships. I would be totally amiss if I don't plug worldtracker.com here, because you're talking about the link between your university professor, you
Yeah.
as the student, and of course the mentoring teacher. So please go check out worldtracker.com if you'd like to build that relationship with your student teachers, mentor teachers, and university lecturers. That's why we built the platform. So Daniel, you get to ask this question to so many different people, and I love this question as part of your podcast. So I thought it would be great asking you your own question. You get to build the school from the ground up, and you've got no limitation on resources whatsoever. What would be like the 3 elements that you want to include in your school?
Yeah, that's a great one. I love, and I took that question away for a while, and my listeners revolted. I just got bored of asking it, right? It's a good question, but they're like, that's the best one. What are you doing? And you mentioned Einstein in thought experiments. That's the point of the question. It's a thought experiment. It's completely ridiculous because you're always going to have the constraints of budget. But if your only limitation is imagination, what would you build? So what would I build? It would absolutely be a school that was focused on solving real problems, right? So let's say there'd be no classes. There's only 2 classes, okay? 3 classes. One that's going to be around physical fitness, because they've just stripped that out of schools too much. So you got to be active. Like, you don't have to be an elite athlete, but move around. It's good for your body and for your soul. So that's one class. The other class is on empathy, right? So in terms of seeing people, hearing people, understanding their perspectives, and building relationships. So that's the second class. And the third class is going to be on problem solving. That's it. And so we'll teach all the core content through solving interesting problems, and whatever that is within a community. Maybe it's a lack of access to clean water. Maybe there's something with global warming that you want to discuss. Maybe it's police brutality and violence, So whatever that issue is, kids are going to solve the problem. So that's the first part. Second part is that there's no building, right? There's no building. The neighborhood, the community is the actual school. And so maybe working with partnerships with different businesses and organizations that own big spaces, we'll have places where we can gather as a school community. But since students are out there solving real problems, then they're going out into the streets, into the places where we need to make change happen. And the community is our laboratory every single day. So we already have the content, we have no building, and then we just have amazing people. And so I don't want to disrespect the training that you need to be a teacher. That's very important. But I also want to be much more open-minded about who we invite to be teachers, right? So I'm not saying or trying to disrespect who becomes a teacher. What I am saying is I want to find the best people who care about kids, right? Who want to act as facilitators of learning and figure out a pathway for them to become a teacher, right? Because sometimes, like, we're going to discount folks just because they don't have the right education. They haven't gone through all the education, or they have high education, but it's not within our industry. And then they're locked out of being a teacher, and that's silly. That wouldn't. You see some businesses saying these days, forget college. You don't even have to go, right? Like, if you have this type of critical mindset or whatever, we'll teach you the skills you need to learn to thrive within our company. But we can't teach these, like, all right, empathy or creativity or critical thinking and all this kind of stuff, right? And so I would just want to be much more open-minded about how we attract the best talent.
Yeah, that's an amazing answer. I love this decentralization of education. The notion of not having one building that's a central place where the teacher and the student and the school comes together every single day, but opening up to the community and learning within the community. That's just more real world. It's that's how the real life operate. So I think that's an excellent answer, and something gives me the idea that you've got a lot of source material to pull from to answer that question. I absolutely love that question. I'm glad you brought it back to your podcast. Just to give you an idea of what happened with me, I was teaching at university level, and I had all our fourth year. So it's the exit level grads that would, like, next year they'd become newly qualified teachers. And we stripped away their entire academic curriculum, and we just said, like, for this year, your major project is to develop the ideal school. So you have to, like, pull in everything you learned from the last 3 years at university and pull that together in developing an ideal school. And what I saw actually frightened me, because and is this coming back to this idea of privilege, seeing that the schools that these students built actually resembled just some of the ex-Model C or some of the more privileged schools that currently exist. That outside of their imagination or their own experience, they thought that the current system or the ideal would be what is already in existence that they never had access to. And that absolutely just broke my heart.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So, okay. So if you haven't voted in our poll yet, we are going to move on over to our Design a Lesson challenge with Daniel. So please make sure you vote. You've got like 30 seconds to vote so that I can see what would be the subjects that we're going to integrate. So just to let you know what this segment is all about, it is to show that every single person can assist with lesson development, whether it's your subject expertise or not. It's just so much better when you cooperate and you collaborate with your colleagues and you get input from everybody when you develop your lesson. So the two of us have got no idea what the topic of our lesson is going to be. Even we don't know what the subject of our lesson is going to be, but we are going to take suggestions from the audience to put this together and integrate a lesson. So let's see, Daniel, what was the votes? Okay. I think this is going to be okay for us. We've got two subjects in the running. We've got creative arts and English, which I'm happy about because I come from a bit more of a creative arts background than from an English background, and you come from an English background, which I really, really appreciate. And then the phase of schooling that we need to focus on is our senior phase. So that's grades 7, 8, and 9. That's the age group 13 to 15. So that's the age group that we are going to be working with. And just to throw a little bit of a spanner in the works, because we've got English and creative arts, I want everybody that's live with us now just to type in a subject, any other subject you'd like us to include with English or creative arts. Pop that into the chat and let's see what's coming up. But Daniel, if you think about creative arts and English for the senior phase, what type of topics are coming up with you?
So topics in terms of what they could explore.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about the how would you build your dream school, it just in general, like I'm thinking about problems, right? So you can think about socioeconomic and community problems in that terms, or like environment. I think about that.
So we've got a suggestion from Leslie. I'm taking the first one that came into the chat, and that is geography. Though those are our three subjects we need to try and integrate: geography, creative arts, and English. So chat, help us out with a few topics here that you think we can include there. So if we look at English as a language is something that we can incorporate basically in every single subject. We just need to find the specific like curriculum elements that you'd like to include. And in creative arts, I mean, that goes through from visual arts, dramatic arts. There are so many different aspects. And then geography, where I'm like a little bit out of my depth, but I think now I got
an idea.
Okay, Daniel, hit us.
So I'm blanking on the lady's name. I apologize for that. But I've seen the video. Have you ever seen the video of this teacher? Let's say it was around the 60s or so. She's an activist, but she taught her students about brown eyes and blue eyes, and it was this experiment, but she basically started saying like the blue-eyed kids were bad kids, And her point was that you can teach sort of like a prejudice, right? Or almost like a racist idea. And what happened in a very short amount of time, like it was within the day, like the blue-eyed kids felt completely disconnected from the class, right? So this same lady, I saw her do a video recently. Somebody was interviewing her, and she was talking about maps. Now this blew my mind. Like I was completely ignorant. Typically, where I come from, when you look at a map, the United States is humongous, right? And I know it's a big place. Okay, I know it's a big place. Been to Africa, I know Africa's a big place. Been to Europe, and I've traveled very easily by train. But the maps always make Europe seem just as big or almost as big as the US, and Canada very big, and this kind of thing. A long way of saying is the geography piece, maybe we challenge our students to investigate if the maps are realistically drawn. And if they're not, what are they communicating? Why are some countries bigger than others, right? And this kind of deal. So for example, too, what she pointed out, like Greenland on a typical map, massive, huge, whatever, bigger than South America, the entire continent. It's not true.
Not the case. It's not realistic.
Not even close. So I don't know what maps look like where you come from, but those are the maps I was exposed to. And so I'm wondering if there's sort of like a social justice slant we could take to teach these 13 to 15-year-olds what is the true scale of maps, compare and contrast to the English piece, right? In terms of why are they depicted that way, right? And then they could even do a presentation to business leaders or the local school board or textbook or map book makers, like, and say, we want to change. We want realistic maps, right? That shows how beautiful Africa is and how much value and resources it has compared to these other continents and countries.
That's extremely valuable, I think. And there's two other things I'd like to add here. If you go from a literature study point of view, I think there's the book, and it's also been turned into a movie called The Wave, which has to do with prejudice. It's basically, if I understand it correctly, it's like a slant on understanding Nazi Germany, because the question was, how can intelligent people become Nazis? And in the school context, the history teacher created this thing called the wave, where they would wear these lapels with a wave on. And if you're in the club, you're like in the club, and how quickly that showed prejudice for kids in school. So there we bring literature and history together. But I like the fact that, because in our context, we do social science, which is a collab or a integration between history and geography. Those two things come together in that subject. And then something else I wanted to add when we're talking about maps is you can bring in the story about how the colonizers of Africa decided on the map which countries or where the borders would fall, and that without having these countries being explored, just physically on the map started drawing lines.
Absolutely.
And taking out of didn't regard things like streams or mountains and stuff like this, and what type of prejudice lies within that. And in the same
groups of people as well. Sorry to interrupt. There are groups of people, because my wife's actually Zimbabwean. She's Shona, and so Shona predominantly are in Zimbabwe, but they're not only in Zimbabwe. They exist in other countries. But the map of Zimbabwe was drawn by colonizers. So yeah. I totally get that.
So there's now like a Western perspective on geography, the bias that comes with that, and the actual real life implication. And then I absolutely love this thing that you said about redrawing the map, because there's this in our case, Africa is always the center of the map, and then you've got the Americas to the left, and you've got Asia, and you've got to the top right. But that's a very African centric type of world map. When the globe is round, and you can recenter the globe, and then what would that map look like?
Yeah, so it might be interesting too then, because I don't have that experience. It's fun for us to share, both how we were brought up. What if the students were able to get maps from all around the world, right? And so what would one from Australia or Asia look like? And just seeing like how the map says a lot about, perspectives, worldviews, prejudices, this kind of thing, who has power, who doesn't. I think that'd be really a lot of fun. and then for them to really try to then make a change. And maybe as well, maybe they make a map of their local community and what does it represent? You know, if we're talking about power structures and that kind of thing, where does power exist within your neighborhood? You know, where's the areas that have a lot of abundance and nice things, and where's the areas that you're told to stay away from, and what's the reason why? So there's so much that we could discuss, you know, within that.
Yeah, colleagues, have you just witnessed the amount of richness that can come from a collaboration between people from different countries and from the interaction with the audience? It's such a rich topic that came from a simple suggestion of combining 3 subjects. Now, imagine what's going to happen if we start doing this regularly in our schools and we start having discussions about integration of our content. So Daniel, this was absolutely fun. I love doing these type of interviews, but it's been a dream of mine having you on the show. So thank you so much for spending time with us. Before we go though, where can people find you? Where would you prefer them to go and consume your content or contact you?
Yeah, the website's great, betterleadersbetterschools.com. So there's the button, you know, under there. We talked about the crazy handle I have for social media at Alien Earbud. So all those places, I'm very active. And my email is just daniel@betterleadersbetterschools.com. I read everything and respond. So whatever is easy for you. I just want to build great relationships and meet some super teachers.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Before we go, just a big thank you once again to wiltracker.com, wiltracker.com, for bringing together student teachers, mentor teachers, and university lecturers. We can't do episodes like these without our partners. And then once again, if you'd like to join our WhatsApp service and join us for more of these types of valuable interviews, please send your name through to +27 63 681 6410. If you like what we do here, please give us a like and subscribe on all the different platforms. We're available on Facebook, on YouTube, and on all the podcast platforms as Super Teachers Unite. Our whole idea is to unite super teachers under one banner so that we can make a positive difference in each and every classroom. Until next time, my name is Francois Odia, and with me, I've got Daniel Bauer, and we are Super Teachers.